Hello students, good evening. This is summary of the mayor of Casterbridge. So this is the text summary. Then I am going to make a summary, very short summary in next slideshow. Here I am explaining with the text, with the help of text. So let us read together. On the September day in 1820s, the Henchard family arrives on foot at the village of Wedden Priors. So this is the setting of Wedden Priors and one family, Henchard family. When novel opens, we come to know that Henchard family is uh, in Henchard family arrives at the foot of the village of Wedden Priors. So they move to Wedden Priors. This is the name of the village. Now, Michael Henchard seeks work as a hairdresser. He is a illiterate, not exactly illiterate, but he is not literate much. Michael Henchard, he is the hero of the novel, right? So that he seeks the work as a hairdresser, right? So he is looking for the job as a hairdresser, but he and his wife Susan. So then there are, this is the hero we can say, and this the heroine, Henchard family, husband wife. So Michael Henchard and Susan, who carries their small daughter Elizabeth Jane. So three characters we come to know from the same family, husband, wife, and daughter. Husband Michael Henchard, Susan Henchard, and Elizabeth Jane Henchard. They arrived Wedden Priors, and he's looking for a job. Michael Henchard is looking for a job. So they have come in a fair. Now, so they stop off food at the furmity tent at the local fair. So they stop they stop in an inn. That's a like a short visit, short stay they take in furmity tent. There is a furmity tent where they stay for some time, and then there is a local fair. Now, Henchard takes serving of alcohol from the furmity woman, and as he becomes drunk, he loudly proclaims his unhappiness with his wife and his foolish decision to marry young. So he there is a furmity woman. She is serving liquor drink. So he takes alcohol and then he becomes drunk, and he loudly claims for his unhappiness with his wife, and he speaks loudly that his decision is foolish decision, and he has he has got married with this lady Suzanne, and this was very foolish decision of his life. This way he announces, because he is drunk now. Eventually he half jokingly decides to auction off his wife, and here, because he is not in he is not conscious, and then he so he just makes fun, and half jokingly he decides to auction his wife in a that's in a fair to any other man. So he starts speaking loudly. So when he starts doing auction, and then a sailor named Richard Newson. So this is the sailor Richard Newson. When he starts selling his wife, and then when he so that he and as he decides to auction off his wife, so then Richard Newson, he's a sailor, he appears in the doorway of the furmity tent and offers 5 guineas for Susan and Elizabeth Jane. So when Michael Henchard proposes, and when he speaks loudly, then Richard Newson appears and he's ready to buy Susan and Elizabeth Jane. These are like mother and wife and daughter. Then who buys Richard Newson buys Susan and Elizabeth Jane, and Susan leaves with the sailor with an angry pronouncement to her husband that she will try for happiness with a different man. And then Susan becomes very much annoyed, and then she decides to go with this unacquainted man, and she would try to become happy. So she takes her daughter, and then both Susan and Elizabeth Jane, they they go with Richard Newson. Now, Henchard, Henchard, drunk and somewhat confused by the outcome of events. He was drunk, and that's why he's not conscious that what he's doing. So then he's confused in that state of mind, and then he could not think that what outcome will be. And then because of drunk, he falls asleep in the furmity tent, and he sleeps in the furmity tent. Now this is the first day event. First day this happened that I'm repeating, Michael Henchard and Susan Henchard and their daughter, their husband wife and their daughter, Elizabeth Jane Henchard, they come to Wedding Prior, this place in a fair, because Michael Henchard is looking for a job of hairdresser. So then they all come, but then and they stay for some time. They stay in the furmity tent, so where drink is being served. So Michael Henchard drinks a lot, and he becomes drunk, and he loses his consciousness, and he decides to auction off his wife. And then Richard Newson, he is on the door of tent, furmity tent, and he is ready to pay 5 guineas. And then he offers 5 guineas, and Michael Henchard is ready to sell his wife Susan and daughter Elizabeth Jane in 5 guineas. And then as uh, 5 guineas is paid to Michael Henchard, and then Susan is ready to go with unknown person, that's a Richard Newson, because she is very much annoyed with her husband, and she decides to be happy with this man. Now Michael Henchard could not think that what outcome will be, and then he falls asleep in a tent. So this is first that's happened. Now the next day, Henchard is furious with his wife for her simple minded agreement to her own self. He knows that she must believe the transaction to be valid. Now, next day, Henchard is very much annoyed with Susan for her simple minded agreement to her own self. And he believes that Susan is very simple, innocent lady, and that's why he must have believed that this is the valid agreement between Richard Newson and Michael Henchard, because Richard Newson had paid 5 guineas, and that's why he knows that she must believe the transaction to be valid. And Michael Henchard knows Susan that she is very innocent lady, and she must have believed that this transaction is valid. Henchard attempts to track down his wife and daughter, but eventually must give up the search. And then next very day he becomes very much panic, and he goes here and there and tries to find out his wife and daughter, but then it's all when, because he could not get, and finally he gives up the search, and he vows, but now he realizes his mistake, and he vows to not drink again for 21 years. So he goes to the church, and he vows that he will not take liquor for 21 years. Now this is second thing which is happened. First he sails his wife and daughter, and second, when he realizes and he becomes conscious, then he realizes next day that his innocent wife must have not aware that this is not valid transaction, but is still, and he is very furious with his wife, but then wife has already gone. So he goes to church and he takes vows that he will not take liquor for 21 years. Now he vows not to drink again for 21 years. He travels south to settle in the town of Casterbridge. So now he's alone, and that's why he moves to south to settle in the town of Casterbridge. So he has to do some job, that's why he is still he is looking for the job, so he moves to south to the town of Casterbridge. Now 18 years later, and then third movement is, all of a sudden it's all 18 years he has been living in the Casterbridge. So 18 years later means the story all of a sudden moves, and then uh, Michael Henchard has been living in the Casterbridge since 18 years. Now, after 18 years, Susan Henchard arrives in Waden Priors. After 18 years, she comes back. Susan Henchard comes back to Waden Priors at the time of annual fair. Same once 18 years back, she attended an annual fair, and same with for the same fair she comes back, and she is accompanied by her grown daughter Elizabeth Jane. Now her daughter is grown up, she becomes 18 years old, and then Susan comes with her daughter Elizabeth Jane, who is unaware about her parents' history. And Elizabeth Jane is unaware about mother, father, and father had they were sold by her father, and she is not aware. She is very much unaware about all these incidents. Now, Elizabeth Jane, who is unaware of her parents' history, Elizabeth Jane has grown up with Richard Newson as her father, because when she was sold, she was very young, and that's why she has grown up with Richard Newson, and she supposes that Newson is her father, and only his recent death at sea has caused Susan to decide to attempt to find her long lost first husband. So, because now what happened, Susan's second husband, Richard Newson, he is died, and because of his death, she decides to go back to Michael Henchard, and that's why uh, she has come back to Casterbridge and in the same fair after 18 years. Susan has recently realized her foolish commitment to Newson. Now Susan is also grown up, and she realizes her foolish commitment with Newson, and then she realizes why did she go with Newson. But now there is no use of thinking this way, because she has spent 18 years with that man. Now For years she believed herself bound to him until a neighbor in whom she had confided the story told her that the transaction could not be valid. And then she was unaware until she comes to wedding prayer and she meets the same lady who served liquor 18 years back, who served liquor to Michael Henchard and that furmity woman. So she told to Susan that transaction was not valid, and then she realizes that it was, why did she go with Newson? But there is no use of it now. Now, Michael Henchard is her one true husband, and she realizes that Michael Henchard is a true husband, valid husband. Anyway, at the fair, Susan finds the formative woman who had once run the tent at the fair, and then the same lady, formative woman, who had once run the tent at the fair 18 years back. The poor old man, now she is also, that formative woman is hmm. Now formative woman, she is that's a that this is the lady becomes old man, directs Susan to Casterbridge. So then when she comes to Waden Priors, so that old lady, formative woman, tells her to go to Casterbridge because she says that uh, Michael Henchard has been shifted to Casterbridge. Now, Susan and Elizabeth Jane arrive at Casterbridge because, as formative woman tells Susan that Michael Henchard is in Casterbridge, so they come. Susan and her daughter Elizabeth Jane arrive in Casterbridge and find, when they come to Casterbridge, they find a group of local residents gathered outside. So what they find, that the local residents gather outside, where outside the hotel, and hotel's name is the Golden Crown Hotel. So, as Susan and Elizabeth see the hotel, so outside the hotel, that's local residents are standing outside the hotel, the Golden Crown Hotel, where they see Henchard occupied inside at the grand meal, and Henchard is occupied with a grand meal. They learn that Henchard is now the mayor of Casterbridge. So now Henchard is become the mayor of Casterbridge. The townsfolk are complaining about a crop of bed wheat when a stranger passes a note to Henchard at the door. So then Henchard is surrounded by outside. Henchard is taking meal. That's a sumptuous lunch he's taking, and outside the hotel, Golden Crown, that so many people, local residents are standing, and they were complaining about crop of bed wheat. When then it is going on, then a stranger passes a note to Henchard, uh, and Susan is reluctant to approach her husband, and she and Elizabeth Jane spend the night at another hotel in town. So Susan comes to know, and Susan watches from far that Henchard is surrounded by many, and she is unwilling to meet Michael Henchard. So she decides to stay in another hotel, and then Susan and her daughter Elizabeth Jane, they spend night in another hotel named the King of Prussia. Now, when they are not able to pay money because they don't have money, so at the King of Prussia, Elizabeth Jane volunteers as the waitress in order to help pay for their stay. So then Elizabeth Jane decides to serve to serve give volunteers as a waitress, and this way they'll be able to stay in the hotel. So she delivers, so that is why she is a waitress now for some time. So she delivers a meal to the strangers who had passed a note to Henjard. So she is not familiar, but then she delivers meal to the same man who passed the note to Henchard. And man's name, he is a young Scotsman, Donald Farfrae. So she serves meal to Donald Farfrae. Now, Henchard arrives to speak to Farfrae. Now, Henchard comes and talk to Farfrae, and his wife and daughter listen in their conversation. So then, when Henchard comes to meet to Farfrae, so they listen their conversation. Then Farfrae has a method of restoring wheat, saving Henchard money. So Farfrae is is aware, he knows how to restore wheat. So Henchard, so that in that note he writes that I know how to save wheat, and he proposes to Henchard that this way I will save your money. Now, the next day, Henchard convinces Farfrae to stay in Casterbridge and to work as his manager at his prosperous wheat and corn business. So Henchard becomes very he like he becomes impressed with Farfrae, and then he proposes to Henchard that why don't you become my manager, and he requests to stay in Casterbridge and for good crop, prosperous wheat and corn business. So here, on the other hand, Susan contacts Henchard via note sent by the unsuspecting Elizabeth Jane. So she writes one note to Susan, writes one note to for Michael Henchard, and then she sent through Elizabeth Jane, her own daughter. But then Elizabeth Jane is unaware with Henchard. She does not know who is this man. Now, Henchard and Susan arrange to meet that night at a secret location near town, the Ring. So then they meet in the town, the Ring, another town. So they meet in the night, Susan and Henchard, and amphitheater. This the Ring is an amphitheater, which is an architectural remnant of the historical Roman occupants of the area. This is the place, very famous place. But then they meet at night. Henchard agrees that he and Susan will slowly renew their acquaintance and then marry. So then, after 18 years, they are meeting, but they decide to meet slowly, and then they slowly reveal to people that they are going to get married, and eventually the pair does not remarry. Pair does remarry, although Henchard confesses to Farfrae that he had once formed an attachment to a woman named Lucetta. So then he gets married, remarry with Susan, but at the same time that Henchard confesses to Farfrae, and he shares with Farfrae that though he has got remarried with his own wife, but then uh, he attached with a woman named Lucetta. This way he opens his secret in front of Farfrae, but as a friend. Now, Lucetta's community shamed her for her obvious, though innocent, infatuation with Henchard, but Henchard had told her of his missing wife and his inability to marry Lucetta for that reason. And what happened here, that Lucetta's community shamed her for her obvious, though innocent, infatuation with Henchard. So then people come to know about relationship with Lucetta's relationship with Henchard. So then Henchard, she requests for marriage, requests Henchard for marriage, but Henchard reveals about his missing wife and his inability to marry. So now, through a pair of mysterious notes sent to both of them, Farfrey and Elizabeth Jane meet at the granary. Now here, what happened? That's a pair of mysterious note sent to both of them. Farfrey and Elizabeth meet at the granary. Here, what happened? Elizabeth and Jane meet at the granary, thinking that they both are waiting for third person. The two begin conversation and get to know each other. And here, what happened, through a pair of mysterious notes, and then they are they love each other. They start loving each other, although the sender of both notes never appears. And then what happened actually? Farfrey and Elizabeth meet at the granary. They meet in the field and thinking that they both are waiting for third person. The two begin a conversation and get to know each other. And they were waiting for someone else, but some who is he not comes. But then they are acquainted to each other, and third one never comes. Anyway, Henchard and Farfrey's once compassionable business partnership begins to decay. Very soon, Henchard and Farfrey's relationship is broken up. Why? Because the two disagree over Henchard's treatment of a man named Abel Whittle. Why? Because of this man, Abel Whittle. They somewhere they for Abel Whittle they have differences of opinion. Who is perpetually late for work, because Abel Whittle is not regular, not sincere, and that's why Henchard tells to Farfrey that makes complaint about Abel Whittle. But Farfrey is very consistent, very cool kind of fellow. So Farfrey's good temperament and his mannerism cause all the workers and villagers to like him and his company. But Farfrey is very cool and jovial kind of man, so he never gets make any he does not make any complaint for anything, and he takes things in a sporting way. And that's why his jolly nature, because of his jolly nature, villagers like him. Now, Henchard and Farfrey organized two separate events for public holiday. So here, their differences of opinion is revealed, is showcased. It's shown by, and then they organize two separate events for public holiday. And Farfrey's dance is far more popular. And Farfrey is a young man, so he dances among villagers and he becomes popular. Henchard jealously observes this and sees Farfrey dancing with Elizabeth Jane at the event. And at the same time, Farfrey is dancing with Elizabeth Jane, and Henchard becomes annoyed. He and Farfrey part ways, and finally he decides to cut off relation with Farfrey. And then but Farfrey remains in town and begins his own counting wheat and corn managing businesses. So Farfrey then still does not take anything negatively, and he starts his own business. But now he decides to be in Casterbridge only, and he starts his own business separately, and he becomes separate with Henchard. Henchard insists that Farfrey keep his distance from Elizabeth Jane. And here Henchard threats to Farfrae that not to meet Elizabeth Jane, his own daughter. Now, Susan does not live long after remarriage. After her death, Henchard confesses the truth of Elizabeth Jane's parentage to his daughter. So Susan all of a sudden dies after remarriage, and then as she dies, Henchard confesses the truth of Elizabeth Jane's parentage of his daughter, and he thinks that now he has to take care of his daughter Elizabeth Jane. Directly after his confession, Henchard finds a letter, so he starts taking care of Elizabeth Jane. But then one day he finds a letter left by his dead wife and labeled. So then in that letter, what's the letter is labeled with not to be open till Elizabeth Jane's wedding day, in which there is a request on the envelope that do not open this letter until Jane's get married. Ignoring this cautionary note, Henchard opens the letter to discover Susan's confession. But he opens the letter, and in that letter there is Susan's confession that Elizabeth Jane is not, that's a confession that Elizabeth Jane is not in fact his own daughter, biological daughter, but a second child born to Susan and Richard Newson. So this is not Elizabeth Jane, but this is Elizabeth Newson. Why? After the first baby died, Elizabeth Jane accepts Henchard, so that she puts the same name of second daughter, because first daughter dies when she reaches to she goes with Richard Newson, and then this is second child Elizabeth Newson, not Elizabeth Jane. Now, anyway, Elizabeth Jane accepts Henchard, her father, but his mom, and then Elizabeth, after 18 years, she meets her father and she accepts her father as a father, and then she does not keep anything in her mind. But the moment Henchard comes to know about Elizabeth, that she is not his own blood, and then he decides that his attitude changes, but his moment of joy is completely disturbed by his awareness of the truth which he does not share with her. Then Henchard does not share anything with Elizabeth Jane, that you are not my daughter or something, but his attitude changes. And here Elizabeth was not taking care, and she was sold by her own father, and still she is not aware, but she accepts Henchard very lovingly, and she takes care of her father. But all of a sudden, when Michael changes his attitude, then she is disturbed, completely disturbed. Now, while Henchard does not confess the contents of Susan's letter to Elizabeth Jane, his behavior towards the young woman changes drastically, and as Henchard comes to know about Elizabeth Jane, that she died and this is Elizabeth Newson and not his own blood, he is no longer kind to her, and he becomes very rude to Elizabeth Newson. He responds aggressively to any evidence of Elizabeth Jane's poor childhood and lack of education. So he responds aggressively to any evidence of Elizabeth Jane's poor childhood and lack of education. Elizabeth Jane tries desperately to correct this through reading and self instruction, but her father does not notice. And Elizabeth still, she is Jane actually, and she tries to correct, and then but father is very strict, and unhappy, Elizabeth Jane is visiting his mother's grave. So then what this Elizabeth Jane, that or Elizabeth Newson actually, then one day she's very unhappy and very much disturbed, and that's why she moves to mother's grave, Susan's grave. And then where in that mother's grave she meets a strange and cultured woman at the graveside. So where she meets one lady. This woman has recently moved to Casterbridge, and she listens to Elizabeth Jane's story. And then Elizabeth is very much disturbed. That's why she shares her story with this lady. However, that lady is unacquainted to her, but then she is very much disturbed, and that's why that lady is very positive and caring lady. So she vomits everything in front of that lady. So that lady invites the young woman to move with her. So lady suggests that you can come and stay with me. Only once this move has been agreed to by Elizabeth Jane and Henchard does. Henchard realizes that this woman is Lucetta. So then she discusses this matter with Henchard, and Henchard comes to know that she is none other than Lucetta. Lucetta has recently inherited money and has moved to Casterbridge after hearing of Susan's death. So Lucetta comes to know that Susan has died. So she moves to Casterbridge for if now Michael Henchard is ready to get married with her. By inviting Elizabeth Jane into her home, she hopes to encourage her father to visit as well. So as she comes to know that Elizabeth Jane is Michael Henchard's daughter, so she takes her daughter to her home with this hope that Michael Henchard will visit because of her daughter. So now, despite Lucetta's initial interest in renewing her attachment to Henchard, she meets Farfrae in an encounter that affects them both profoundly. But there is another incident that because Elizabeth Jane is staying with Lucetta, so then Farfrae visits to Lucetta's house. But as Farfrae meets Lucetta, then they start loving each other. Now Henchard feels he ought to remarry Lucetta and begins countering her, only to realize that Farfrae is his rival for her affection. So now, because Susan has died, and Henchard decides to get married with Lucetta, but he realizes that Lucetta is already attached with Farfrae, and he feels jealous. He feels because in the beginning also he feels that he's rival to him, and then Farfrae is unaware of this rivalry. Farfrae is very jovial, simple, kind-hearted fellow, so he does not know that Michael Henchard is my Henchard competes with me. So he is unaware with this rivalry. Now, Lucetta confesses the confusing situation to Elizabeth Jane without explicitly telling her who each of the characters in the story are in real life. So Lucetta confesses the confusing situation to Elizabeth Jane without explicitly telling her who each of the characters in the story are in real life. Elizabeth Jane feels that Lucetta owes her loyalty to the first man she was interested in, who she realizes eventually is her father. Now Elizabeth Jane comes to know that Lucetta's life, my father was first man. Now she is in love with Farfrae. Now Henchard hires Job. This is another thing. What? Henchard hires Job, a man who he had originally passed over in favor of Farfrae as his business manager. What happened actually? That as Henchard meets Farfrae and he offers him for the post of manager, and then Farfrey becomes manager of Michael Henchard. However, before this, once upon a time, Michael Henchard had already promised to Job that uh, he will fire Job for as a manager, for him as a manager. But now he selected Farfrey. So now, in an attempt to drive Farfrey out of business, Hanchard and Job buy extensively before the harvest. Now, in an attempt to drive Farfrey out of business, now so Job becomes now, because Farfrey has already left Michael Henchard. So now the who become friend, Henchard and Job. And why? Because they want to throw Farfrey from Casterbridge. Now, Henchard visits a man who predicts the whether to learn that the harvest will be poor, or he hopes to resell at high profit. So Henchard is very much confused now, and before hmm, like uh, before harvesting the crop, he visits um, uh, to a man who predicts for future about a future about crop and all. So then, and he asked that we can say astrologer, that whether he will get profit from the crop or not, or something. However, the weather stays nice and Henchard has to resell at the lower price. But then that man predicts wrongly, and finally Henchard weather is very fine, and Henchard on the other hand has to sell his crop in very low price. At the very end of the harvest, the weather is poor, but weather is poor at the end of the harvesting, and Farfay makes a great profit, and everything is normal, weather is good, and that's why um, Farfay Farfay gains good profit from the crop. Now, Henchard's business suffers greatly, for which he blames Job. What happened then? Henchard's business is very suffers greatly, and that's why he blames to Job. Now, Henchard comes to Luceta's home, and blackmails her into agreeing to marry him. Now Henchard is already confused, so he visits to Lucetta and he pressurizes for marriage now. And he blackmails that she should marry with him. Henchard has a collection of letters written by Lucetta to herself, and he vows to himself, and he vows to make their past relationship public unless she promises to marry him. Now Henchard shows behaves very badly, and he says Lucetta that if you don't marry with me, I will public your letters, love letters which you had written me once upon a time. The next day, Henchard presides over a local trial, and the woman brought to court is the formative woman. And next day, uh, he presides one local trial, and the lady who came, who was brought, that is formative woman, who recognizes Henchard and reveals Henchard's dark secret that he once sold his own wife and child. Now, the formative woman reveals everyone that this is the mayor of Casterbridge, and he once upon a time sold his wife and daughter. Now, Henchard's reputation in Casterbridge suffers. Now, Henchard's reputation is tarnished like anything, and because his secrets are open now, as his business. At the same time, his business also suffers. So Henchard fails in all the direction because his family is destroyed, wife has died, his crops is failed, and his secrets are open now. While walking, Lucetta and Elizabeth Jane are chased by a loose bull. So now, one day, Lucetta and Elizabeth are walking on the road and they are chased by a bull. Henchard appears and grabs the animal, rescuing the women, and Henchard helps them. And then he escorts Lucitta's home, where she confesses that she has secretly married Farfrey. So as he went to goes to Lucitta's home, and Lucetta tells that she has secretly married uh, with Farfrey that week in another town. She wanted to secure him as her husband before Henchard could reveal the truth about their past. So she said that because I don't want to reveal my past with you, I spend time with you. She knew she could not marry Henchard after hearing about how he once treated Susan and his own daughter. And now Lucetta comes to know about Henchard's secret that he had sold his wife and daughter, and she begs Henchard to not reveal the truth at this point and so ruin her happy marriage with Farfrey. And she requests Henchard not to reveal, not to show my letter to anyone. Despite Henchard's anger, he does not expose the secret. So Henchard is very much annoyed, but he does not expose the secret. He does not open the letters in front of Elizabeth Jane. Then Elizabeth Jane is also hurt and angry to learn the Lucetta's marriage to Farfrey. But she's also hurt because she loves Farfrey, and Farfrey is already married. So Elizabeth gets annoyed with Lucetta and she moves out of her friend's house, and she leaves Lucetta's house now. Now Henchard loses his bankrupt business, his home, and all his personal possession to his creditors. And now Henchard is a big loser because he is bankrupt. He has lost his home, his personal possessions, everything. Now Henchard frequently stands on the second bridge near the lower part of town, bemoaning his situation. And now he's kind of loser and stands the second bridge, and then he used to bemoan for his situation. And finally, when his 20, 20 years are up, he begins to drink heavily again, and he vows not to take drink for 21 years. So it's already 20 years, and now he starts drinking again. Henchard visits Farfrey, who has purchased what used to be Henchard's grand house. So now Farfrey is in very good situation and rich man. So he buys the home which had been once upon a time from Michael Henchard grand house, and reads several of Lucetta's letters to him aloud. So then he had purchased and what used to be Henchard's grand house, and reads several of Lucetta's letter to him aloud. And then he reads number of letters in front of Henchard. However, in the moment, he cannot bring himself to hurt her by sharing her name as the author of the letters. Henchard gives Job the letters to return to Lucetta. However, in this end, Henchard is very much innocent, and he gives letter to Jobs to return it back to Lucetta. so she can keep her secret. But Job, however, is angry with Lucetta for ignoring his request that she put in a good word for him as a working partner for her husband. Then, once upon a time, Job request had requested to Lucetta that uh, he is looking for the job. So uh, he speaks good word to Farfrey, uh, and then this way Job gets one job. But she does not did not fare. She did not uh, speak anything, so that he gets with annoyed with Job. So he reveals letters. The letters fall into the hands of villagers who plan a Skimpton, a method of publicly shaming those who are perceived to be disloyal or unworthy of their spouses. And then this is the kind of punishment which is given by villagers if they come to know about any legal practice. Now, Henchard plans to kill Farfrey and confronts him in a hay loft. And here Henchard is very much injurious now, very much dangerous kind of fellow. The two struggle, but again, Henchard is unable to do through with a harmful plan. Farfrey rides out of the town and is therefore absent that evening as the Ismington occurs. The Ismington features effigies of Lucetta and Henchard tied back to back and paraded through the streets. And then make villagers make effigies of Lucetta and Henchard and tied back to back, and then they just hmm, paraded through streets. Then Elizabeth Jane arrives at Lucetta's home and attempts to stop her from seeing the parade. So then here Elizabeth Jane comes to Lucetta so that Lucetta should not see the parade, but she does and collapses. And as she sees that parade and she collapses, Farfrey returns, but Lucetta has become dangerously ill, and because of setback she becomes ill. While she may have confessed some of the truth behind her illness to her husband, it is unclear to what extent she shared the story of her past. However, she confesses her past in front of Farfrey, her husband, but at 4 o'clock that morning, Lucetta passes away. But finally, she passes away. Now, Henchard and Elizabeth Jane renew their connection. Henchard grows to depend on the girl and her affection for him, despite his knowledge that she is not his biological daughter. Now, Henchard accepts Elizabeth Jane as a daughter, uh, though he knows that she is not her biological daughter. But now, Richard Newson, who all had believed dead, arrives in Casterbridge and visits Henchard. This is something new that Richard Newson comes back because he is alive, and he comes back to he arrives in Casterbridge and visits Henchard. He had pretended to be dead in order to free his wife to return Henchard, but learning of her death, he has arrived in Casterbridge to find his daughter. Actually, Richard Newson deliberately that pretended that he died, however, he is alive, so that he can give Susan to Henchard. Then, but um, Elizabeth Jane Newson is another daughter, his own daughter, and that's why he wants to meet his daughter. So, as he comes to Casterbridge, Henchard tells Newson that Elizabeth Jane is dead. in order to keep her love and attention for himself. And then he thinks that if he reveals that Elizabeth Jane is alive, and then he has to share Elizabeth Jane's love with with her another father, and that's why he is very much possessive with Elizabeth Jane. Henchard plans to commit suicide at a place in the river near the second bridge, but does not when he sees his own effigy from the Ismington floating in the river. As Henchard sees uh, that people, villagers are very against, and then everything is open. The sign or vision of possible future saves Henchard's life, and then he drops the idea. Actually, he wants to die, but he drops, and then in his depressed state, Henchard realizes the burden he is on Elizabeth Jane's happiness and leaves Casterbridge. So he thinks that he cannot live with Elizabeth Jane, and he decides to leave Casterbridge, wandering the countryside for his remaining days. Then Richard Newson returns to Casterbridge and reacquainted with his daughter. Then Elizabeth Jane and Farfrey are married, and her father dances joyfully at their wedding. Then Elizabeth Jane and Farfrey seek out Henchard. So then here Elizabeth Jane and Farfrey, they have got married. In their wedding, Richard Newson enjoying, but then daughter Elizabeth Jane and Farfrey, they start looking for Henchard, but only to learn from Abel Whittle that he has passed away. And then they got to know that Henchard has already passed away. Henchard has left behind a will, a final expression of his bitterness and loneliness in the world. And he writes in his letter not to find out his whereabout, and this is the last request, and this way this the tragic ending of this novel. So that is end. Thank you so much. I will make another story. I will speak tomorrow without text, right? Thank you so much. God bless you.